Alright, so I'm here along the side of the road here. I'm at a public campsite, and right now we're looking for horseweed to gather. Horseweed is this guy right here. Being fall, it doesn't really have much in terms of leaves on it, so it's not going to be the greatest for identification. There is a green one right here, so you can kind of see what the tops look like. So what I'm looking for is a stalk a good few feet long and about pinky thick. This one is okay, but not necessarily as thick as I'd like, so I'm going to keep on looking. There's also sunflower and hemp here. Both of those will work for hand drills, but horseweed is my preferred material, and so if I can find a good hand drill spindle piece out here of horseweed, that's what we're going to use. I'll turn the camera back on once I found a good one. Alright, I got a good handful of horseweed here, and I gathered a cottonwood branch at this spot last week when I did this video for the first time. So I'm going to find a good spot and start processing out a set. After that, we'll make a tinder bundle and a fire lay, and we'll get going with the fun part. Stick with me. Not sure what just happened there. My camera app just closed, I guess, but whatever. So, I'm going to process out another one or two of these horseweed stalks to give myself a couple options for my spindle. This one looks pretty good. So again, I'm going to score and snap. Getting the straightest section of this horseweed that I can. That's pretty dang straight. It's a good thickness. I like this piece. That'll probably be a very good spindle. We'll do one more of these. That one's fairly good. I do like to do this if the break or cut from the initial harvest isn't very clean. Like this one splits up about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to definitely cut this piece off. And there's a fat leaf node on here that I'd otherwise have to carve down. So I'm just going to go right past that leaf node. Measure out my length based on curves and straightness of the spindle. And honestly, this one has a slight curve to it. It's not bad. This is very long. This spindle goes from my fingertip to my sternum. That's a very long spindle that'll get kind of whippy at the top as you go. So I don't like using spindles that are quite that long. So I'm going to go ahead and knock off about 8 to 10 inches of it. There, that's more manageable. And pretty straight. So processed out 3 spindle blanks, or at least sized them out. The next thing I do with my spindles is I feel them up, see if there are any hard, sharp, pointy leaf nodes. Especially with sea willow and horseweed, those leaf nodes can wreck you if you're not careful. So I'm just feeling it, and there are a few. This one's not too bad, but there are a few. So what I do for this is I take the spine of my knife, not the edge. I set the spindle on my knee, and I just pull it back, putting pressure with my knife, and this is just smoothing it out. I'm going to do this, and I'll change my scraping motion sometimes. It doesn't really matter how you're doing it, so long as you're not creating a bunch of flat spots with the edge. So just work down those harder, sharper spots. Near the bottom isn't as important because your hands aren't going to be going all the way to the bottom of the spindle. But the more that you can get off in the working parts of the spindle, the better. So that feels pretty good. I'll do the same to the other two. One tip with this is to go in the direction of growth. So if this is the bottom of the spindle and this is the top, you go from the bottom because the leaves are growing up and out. And if you go from the top, you might get in there and split it if you're not careful. So if you go from the bottom, that's almost never an issue. There is a larger spot on here that I do have to cut away a little, but it's not bad. It's not going to be detrimental or anything, won't be a problem. Another one there. And for spots like those where there's a larger bump, just carefully shave them down, and then you'll use the spine of your knife to scrape that area smooth, and that will get rid of any potential issues that spot would have. So yeah, we're just going to keep on scraping these until we've got good smooth spindles. The reason I gathered multiple is that if you're only using or only harvesting one spindle and say it's a little bit green, or it breaks when you're trying to use it, or it's not as straight as it looked and you can't straighten it without a fire or whatever, it's good to have backups. You can never have too many hand drill spindles because eventually you will lose one, break one, burn it on accident, whatever. So if you can gather multiple, gather multiple. Alright, so this one's getting pretty good. The reason we don't use the edge of the knife for the scraping, a couple reasons actually, is we want to preserve the edge of our knife as much as we can, because if you have to sharpen in the field, that's time consuming, or potentially time consuming, and kind of just a hang up that you don't want to have to worry about if you can avoid it. And so if you square the spine of your knife, or if it's already squared, it doesn't have to be a sharp edge on the back whatsoever. I only square the back of my Mora knives maybe once a year, if that, with a file, and they work just fine for scraping. You're not going to scrape a bow with a spine like this, but for scraping leaf nodes off of a horseweed hand drill, they're pretty great. Alright, so that is 3 raw hand drill spindles roughed out. I'm going to start working on the fireboard next. So for the fireboard, I'm going to be, there's a few ways you can do this. I'm going to just be doing it the simple, easy way since this is a beginner video. I'm not going to worry about it being super primitive or anything, so I'm going to use a saw and a hatchet. So I'm going to find the length I want, and right about here where this branch comes off is a perfect length for me, a nice long fireboard. So I'm just going to cut it off right below that branch. Easy peasy. And now I'm going to use my hatchet to split this right down the middle. There's already a natural split here, so I'm going to just try to go with that. And as long as your hatchet is sharp, it doesn't really matter what brand it is or anything like that. Mine happens to be a Holtzbrook from Sweden, but any American-made hatchet of decent steel will work just fine so long as it's sharp. I find that the side splitting technique is one of the best ways to do this in terms of safety. So now I'm just going to essentially plane it down with the hatchet. I like a nice flat top and bottom to my fireboard. Not everybody will fully flatten their fireboards, but I find that it helps prevent rocking. And I don't like having a round surface on the top of my fireboard, so we're just going to flatten this down. All of this can be done without the hatchet. You can use your knife to carve it flat, and I will be using my knife to clean it up, but for quicker removal for the video and Honestly, I just prefer to use my hatchet for this over my knife because it does go much faster. I'm just going to use what tools I've got with me instead of putting some kind of fake limits on myself for it. Alright, so that's pretty good for the top. I'll clean it up with a knife. So now we'll just flatten up the bottom. Alright, that's decent. So for the rough work, that's all there really is to it. I split a straight grain piece of cottonwood in half, planed the top and bottom with a hatchet. Now I'm just going to finish carving it flat with my knife. I don't think I mentioned earlier, but for my fireboard thickness, I like to go about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, depending on the material. Thinner fireboards will heat up a little bit faster, but if it's too thin, you may burn through it too quickly and burn all the way through your fireboard before you get it cold. And with thicker fireboards, they can act as a heat sink, where the heat is dispersed throughout the material and make it harder to get your coal. So I've got that about the thickness that I like, mostly flat. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just want it to sit flat on the ground so that when you're working with it, it's not going to roll. This is a good 3-finger wide fireboard, so I'll be able to have holes up both sides with plenty of room in the middle, so it won't be fragile, it won't snap in half on me. I have had that happen with yucca and sotol because they are soft. With a narrow fireboard, it happens pretty easily. So I'm going to go ahead and shave down the sides of my board. I like to have the edges of my board fairly square. Again, it doesn't have to be exact or anything, but it helps for carving in your notch or your chimney or whatever you want to call it, if it does have squared off sides. So that's pretty decent. One more thing I like to do with my fireboards is I don't really like the dimensional lumber look that you get when you saw cut a fireboard out. So I just take my knife and I shape up the ends. Oftentimes I'll make a canoe shape or just round them off on the ends. For this I'll probably just round it. This is purely aesthetic. It doesn't really affect anything. I just don't like the look of saw cut ends on my fireboard. So I'm going to go ahead and shape this up real quick, and we'll keep going. Alright, so I've got a cottonwood fireboard. I've got a couple horseweed spindle blanks. So now I'll end this video here, and we will pick back up with the anatomy of fire and how to build a fire lay. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in a minute. click.